sacrificed so much for equality and liberty and justice for all, including the Black women who are often, too often, overlooked, but so often prove they are the backbone of our democracy.
The relationship between Black women and the Democratic Party is an interesting one. Black women aren't just voting to save the party for the party's sake. This directly has to do with the fact that this impacts Black women's lives. Black women, when they get together, they get things done. My name is Sally Niema. I am a professor of urban politics at Northwestern University. In my work, I talk about how when Black people are engaged in the democratic process repeatedly and they still don't receive a democratic response from government, this could lead to what I call collective participatory debt, or CPD, which is basically extreme fatigue and disillusionment with the democratic process following repeated participation in it without a fair response. Black women currently are showing up. They showed up for the past 20 years. And in terms of their voting for a Democratic Party, we're talking around 98% in some elections, 90% in others, but almost always Democrats consistently. So there's a lot of ways to think about why Black women have consistently voted for the Democratic Party. One is that they actually don't have a lot of other choices. We are in a two-party system, and we have a Republican Party that, for example, will put the Voting Rights Act on the table. And we know that Black women, unlike white women, weren't able to vote until the Voting Rights Act was passed. And so when you have a two-party system where your literal right to vote is on the table in one of those parties, you are essentially what we call political science captured. And so that plays a role. I do want to make clear, though, that Black women aren't just voting to save the party for the party's sake, but that this directly has to do with the fact that this impacts Black women's lives and their material conditions. We also have to think about Black men and the fact that mass incarceration impacted Black men disproportionately, as it did Black women, but in ways where it meant that given that Black men were imprisoned at a really high rate, the representation of Black women on the Democratic Party in terms of in the electorate is really important for representing Black people. And so Black women end up having to play this important role of being the mules of the Democratic Party, so being the only group that votes consistently for the Democratic Party, the mules of Black people, being the people who actually represent Black people, and then also being a group that is representing people of color more generally due to the fact that they are voting at this really high rate. Because they're coming out in a collective way, they end up voting in a way that helps everyone, right? And Black women know that they have this unique position, and so they continue to play it. But I think we also see the limits of having to be the saviors of democracy, especially when you don't get a democratic response. If the Democratic Party or the federal government more generally wants to thank Black women, first they have to listen to Black women, and Black women have made their demands clear. For example, in my research, I highlight the fact that Black women are in fact the least punitive group of Americans. They are opposed to zero tolerance policies, and yet they are among those who are most punished. When you have a president as well as a vice president who have a history of expanding the carceral state, it's clear, I think, what needs to be done to respond to Black women in that regard. Black women need policies that actually doesn't criminalize and dehumanize Black people and people of color more generally. It's clear that especially in the area of criminal justice, that there is an opportunity for both Biden and Harris to transgress their previous practices and build up more liberatory institutions that map on to what Black women want for themselves and for their families. So if we want to save this nation, we need to support Black women, we need to listen to Black women, and we need to actually make sure that our policies respond.